Have you ever wondered why breathing is slowly starting to feel harder and why the effects of climate change never seem to hit everyone the same way?
Or how the small lifestyle choices we make every day quietly shape the environment around us?
Well then, you're in the right place. This is Earthwise
Or otherwise.
a weekly climate news roundup brought to you by Climate Action Life in collaboration with the Jindal School of Journalism and Communication.
Every week, we bring you climate stories from around the world, along with people's voices, cultural reflections, and small actions that we can all take in our everyday lives.
On this journey, I'm Ritvik.
And I'm Gayatri. Two perspectives, but one shared concern: the planet we call our home.
This is Earthwise or otherwise.
Because the real question isn't just what being Earthwise looks like.
It is also what the cost of choosing otherwise might just be. So now let's begin with our weekly National Climate Check-in, where we break down what's happening across India.
From policy shifts to ground level impact, here's everything you need to know about the country's changing climate story.
Gayatri, don't you think climate discussions often feel very distant? Like they only happen at international summits, government conferences, or meetings far removed from ordinary life. But recently, India made a major move that could shape country's environmental future for decades. According to a report published by the Times of India, our nation officially submitted its updated climate action commitments to the United Nations climate body. These new pledges include increasing non-fossil fuel energy capacity to 60% by 2035, reducing emissions intensity by 47%, and expanding forest cover to create a larger carbon sink. Now, on paper, these targets sound extremely ambitious, and they are. India is one of the world's fastest growing economies and also one of the most populated countries globally. Balancing economic growth with environmental sustainability is an enormous challenge. The government also stated that achieving these goals would depend heavily on international cooperation, financial support, and access to advanced clean technologies. And this highlights one of the biggest debates in global climate politics today. Developing countries like India, for example, argue that wealthier nations should become economically powerful through decades of industrialization and fossil fuel use. So now, when developing nations are being asked to transition rapidly towards a perhaps cleaner energy system, many people believe that richer countries should also help, supporting this transition very fairly. And this is why climate change is no longer just an environmental issue. It is also deeply connected to economics, inequality, and development. At the same time, India's growing investments in renewable energy sectors like solar and wind power reflect a major shift towards sustainable development. Experts believe these efforts could create jobs, improve energy security, and reduce long-term dependence on fossil fuels. But climate targets only matter if implementation follows. Policies need proper execution. Industries need accountability, and public awareness must increase for real change to happen. Because otherwise, climate promises may remain ambitious statements without creating meaningful environmental impact. The call to action for this is stay informed about climate policies and understand how government decisions shape environmental futures. Support renewable energy practices and become conscious of your own energy consumption habits. Encourage discussions around sustainable development instead of treating climate change as a very distant issue. Real climate progress requires both strong policies and responsible public participation. Environment responsibility is not only the role of government, it depends on collective awareness and action.
Ritvik, when we think about climate disasters like cyclone, heavy storms, or sudden floods, we usually focus on the destruction after they happen, like the damaged homes, displaced families, and disrupted lives. But what if technology could help us prepare earlier and, possibly reduce the scale of damage before the disaster even begins? According to a report published by the Times of India, the Indian Institute of Tropical Meteorology has launched a coastal atmospheric research testbed in Visakhapatnam under Mission Mausam. The project aims to improve forecasting for cyclones, thunderstorms, heat waves, and other extreme weathers affecting India's eastern coastline, especially regions around the Bay of Bengal. Scientists are using advanced monitoring systems to study cloud formation, greenhouse gases, rainfall behavior, humidity patterns, and changing ocean atmosphere interactions in real time. The goal is to strengthen weather forecasting models so that authorities and communities receive earlier and more accurate warnings even before the disasters occur. Ritvik, this matters deeply because India's coastal regions are becoming increasingly vulnerable to climate-related disasters. Rising sea temperatures are intensifying cyclones and increasing the unpredictability of weather systems. Millions of people living along Indian coastline, including fishing communities, laborers and small business owners, depend heavily on stable weather conditions for survival and livelihood. Even a delay of, let's say, few hours in cyclone prediction can affect evacuation efforts, emergency responses, and disaster preparedness. So, better forecasting is not just a scientific advancement, it can really save lives. What's also interesting to me is how climate science itself is evolving. Earlier, responses mostly focused on reacting after disasters happened. But now, technology is rather increasingly being used to predict patterns, study long-term climate behavior, and strengthen preparedness systems before crisis emerges. However, scientists can also warn that forecasting alone is not enough. Urban planning, infrastructural development, and environmental conservation must improve alongside the scientific advancements. Coastal regions facing rising sea levels and stronger storms need long-term adaptation strategies because, otherwise, climate disasters may just continue becoming more frequent and more destructive than societies are prepared to handle. Well, the call to action to this is that stay informed about weather alerts and climate advisory issued by scientific agencies and local authorities. Support awareness about disaster preparedness within your communities, especially in the climate vulnerable regions. Encourage conversations around investing in science, research, and sustainable infrastructure because climate resilience depends heavily on preparedness. Technology can strengthen our response to climate change, but public awareness, responsible planning, and collective action are equally important. The more informed society becomes, the better equipped community will be to face future climate risks.
Gayatri, isn't it strange how one part of the country is dealing with dangerous heat waves while another is suddenly flooded with heavy rainfall and thunderstorms at the exact same time? It is almost feeling like the seasons themselves are becoming unstable. According to a recent report published by the Times of India, the Indian Meteorological Department has warned several states about overlapping extreme weather conditions, including heat waves, hailstorms and thunderstorms, and intense rainfall occurring simultaneously across different regions of the country. States like Rajasthan and parts of central India are experiencing severe heatwave conditions, while Kerala, Himachal Pradesh, Uttarakhand and northeastern regions are witnessing heavy rain and storm activity. Meteorologists say that these sudden and overlapping shifts are becoming increasingly common because climate change is disrupting traditional seasonal weather patterns. What makes this situation especially concerning is the unpredictability. Earlier, weather systems followed a relatively stable cycle. Farmers could plan crops around seasonal rainfall, travels could predict and plan their travel conditions according to the weather conditions, and cities could prepare for monsoon periods with some level of certainty. But now, extreme weather events are becoming more sudden, overlapping, and difficult to forecast accurately. A single region can shift from intense heat to heavy rain within a short period, and that unpredictability affects far more than daily convenience. Agriculture suffers heavily when seasonal timings become unstable. Crops can fail due to sudden rainfall or excessive heat. Transportation systems face disruptions because of storms and flooding. Public health systems struggle with heat-related illnesses, waterborne diseases, and emergency responses during extreme weather conditions. What is even more worrying is that scientists believe these climate disruptions may become more frequent in coming years if global temperature continues rising. Climate instability is no longer just about individual disasters. It is about gradual breakdown of predictable weather behavior. And when societies lose predictability, everything from food systems to infrastructure planning becomes more difficult. Because otherwise, predictability and unpredictability itself become one of the biggest climate threats countries have to deal with in future. The call to action for this is pay closer attention to climate warnings and emergency advisories rather than treating them casually. Prepare for sudden weather changes by planning ahead and staying informed through reliable meteorological updates. Communities should actively support disaster preparedness efforts and local climate awareness programs. At the individual level, reducing environmental harm through conscious energy and resource use also contributes to long-term climate stability. Adapting to climate change starts with taking its warning signs seriously before they become impossible to ignore.
Well, now let's take a look at what's happening around the world in climate action.
From global policies to on-ground impact, here's your weekly International Climate Roundup. Ritvik, when people think about protecting rainforests, they usually imagine environmental activists, governments, or climate scientists leading the effort. But surprisingly, one of the newest forces influencing the future of the Amazon rainforest may actually be changing consumer behavior in China. According to a report published by Reuters, growing demand among Chinese consumers for sustainable and traceable food products is beginning to influence Brazil's beef industry and could potentially help reduce deforestation in the Amazon rainforest. The report focused on major initiatives led by the Tianjin Meat Industry Association in China, whose members are planning to import 50,000 metric tons of certified deforestation-free Brazilian beef by the end of 2026. This is significant because cattle farming is considered one of the biggest causes of Amazon deforestation. Environmental scientists' studies show that 90% of deforested land in the Amazon is eventually converted into cattle pasture. You know, Ritvik, what makes this development especially important is that it challenges a long-standing assumption that consumers only care about low prices. Well, according to industry leaders involved in the initiative, many Chinese consumers, especially younger and wealthier populations, are becoming more environmentally conscious and are increasingly willing to pay more for products that are sustainable, traceable, and environmentally responsible. The project also introduces a Beef on Track certification system that allows consumers to trace whether the beef they purchased is linked to deforestation or unethical labor practices. Experts believe that if sustainable products gain stronger market value, companies and industries may feel greater pressure to protect forests and improve environmental standards. However, the situation is still complex. Climate experts warn that Brazil's monitoring and traceability systems remain weak, and illegal deforestation linked to cattle farming continues to be a major problem. There are also concerns that sustainability labels alone may not be enough without stricter regulation and international accountability. Still, this story reveals something extremely important about climate change. It is not only shaped by governments and policies, but also by consumer choices, business practices, and global markets. And sometimes, even small shifts in consumer awareness can influence industries operating thousands of kilometers away. Because otherwise, Economic demand may continue driving environmental destruction faster than conservation efforts can stop it. Well, the call to action to this is become more aware of how everyday consumption habits connect to environmental issues around the world. Support sustainable and ethically sourced products wherever possible, and encourage conversations around responsible consumer behavior. Understand that climate action is not limited to government or activists. Industries and consumers also play an important role in shaping environmental outcomes. Protecting ecosystems like the Amazon rainforest requires global responsibility because environmental destruction in one region ultimately affects the entire planet.
Gayatri, wildfires are often imagined as isolated disasters happening somewhere far away. But what is happening in the United States right now shows how climate change is dramatically expanding both the scale and the intensity of environmental disasters. According to a report published by the Financial Times, the United States is already experiencing one of the worst wildfire seasons in the recent years, with nearly 1.9 million acres burned in 2026 alone. What is especially alarming is that wildfire risks are spreading beyond traditional hotspots like California into eastern and northeastern states that historically experienced fewer large-scale fires. Scientists say that prolonged droughts and rising temperatures, along with reduced rainfalls and changing climate conditions, are creating environments where fires spread faster and become hard to control. And the impact of these fires goes far beyond the forests. Wildlife affect air qualities across entire regions, making breathing difficult even for people living far from the fire zones. Schools and workplaces are disrupted, families are forced to evacuate homes, and wildlife habitats are destroyed. Local economies are suffering major losses. Recovery is also taking a lot of years. Rebuilding infrastructure, restoring ecosystems, and helping communities recover emotionally and financially becomes a long-term process. Climate experts warn that rising global temperatures are now increasing with the length of wildfire seasons worldwide. In many regions, dry conditions are now lasting longer than before, creating ideal conditions for fires to ignite and spread rapidly. What this reveals is that climate disasters are no longer staying within predictable geographic boundaries. Environmental instability is expanding into regions once considered relatively safe. And if global temperatures continue increasing, scientists believe wildfire seasons may even become more severe in the future. Because otherwise, extreme climate disasters may continue growing faster than emergency systems and societies prepared to manage. The call to action for this is recognize that climate disasters is one part of the world are warning for everyone else, not isolated incidents. Support sustainable environmental practices and reduce activities that contribute to excessive carbon emissions. Stay informed about climate science rather than treating such events as temporary or distant problems. Encourage environmental awareness within your communities and support policies aimed at long-term sustainability. Preventing future disasters requires consistent global responsibility and not just emergency responses after the crisis occurs.
Ritvik, while the world continues facing rising heat waves, fuel instability, and growing climate disasters, dozens of other countries recently gathered in Colombia to discuss something many governments still consider politically difficult: moving away from fossil fuels completely. According to a report published by Climate Action Live, 57 countries representing nearly one-third of the global economy attended the Santa Marta Climate Conference in Colombia to discuss transitioning away from coal, oil, and gas. The meeting was seen as an attempt to break the long-standing deadlock in global climate negotiations, where discussions about fossil fuels have often remained slow and politically sensitive. Countries discussed reducing dependence on fossil fuel economies, strengthening renewable energy systems, improving energy security, and creating fair transition plans for workers and developing nations. What made the conference especially significant was that it shifted the focus from simply reducing emissions to directly addressing fossil fuel production itself. Climate experts at the summit stressed that fossil fuels are responsible for the majority of global greenhouse gas emissions and warned that continued expansion could push global warming far beyond safe limits. Discussions also explored how countries remain financially trapped in fossil fuel systems because of debt structures, subsidies, and global economic dependence on oil and gas industries. At the same time, the conference also exposed major unresolved issues. Despite strong discussions, no legally binding agreement or fossil fuel treaty emerged from the summit. Activists and experts warned that voluntary climate promise may not be enough without concrete timelines and international accountability. Another major point was India's absence from the conference despite its growing renewable energy ambitions and vulnerability to climate disasters like heat waves and flooding. What this summit truly highlighted is that climate change is no longer only an environmental issue. It is deeply connected to economics, international politics, energy security, and global inequality. The conference also revealed another important reality. The transition away from fossil fuels is no longer a question of if, but how. Countries are now trying to figure out how to shift economies, industries, and energy systems without causing financial instability or harming vulnerable populations. Because otherwise, climate summits risk becoming spaces for discussions rather than meaningful transformation. Well, the call to action to this is stay informed about international climate negotiations because global decisions directly influence your local realities. Support renewable energy practices and become more conscious of how fossil fuel dependence affect economies, environment, and our daily life. Encourage conversations around climate accountability and fair transitions so that developing countries are not left behind in global climate action. Climate change cannot be resolved through awareness alone. It requires long-term commitment, cooperation, and action from governments, industries, and individuals alike.
Today, we did not just look at climate as a crisis, but rather as a series of choices. Choices we see in the news, in boardrooms, in government files, and in our own kitchens.
And with every choice, we pick a direction, either walking with the planet or choosing to ignore it.
This conversation is made possible by Climate Action Live, a youth-driven platform by Madhur Singh that takes climate awareness beyond conversations and connects it to real-world action.
At its core, Climate Action Live creates space for young voices where learning, dialogue, and action all come together.
If you want to be a part of this movement, then do visit the Climate Action Live website and explore how you can contribute.
You can also check out the New Imaginations Research Center at the Jindal School of Journalism and Communication, which works with young scholars to expand stories and perspectives, helping us understand climate and society through new narratives.
So, until next week when we meet again,
keep asking yourself, are you choosing to be Earthwise
or otherwise?